We have a very interesting topic for you today, titled Buy versus Build, an expert discussion, which we are very sure you will enjoy. The structure of the program will be a brief presentation, introductions by Seth Narayanan, and then a brief presentation by David Carabinos, followed by a panel discussion with Seth and the three Buy versus Build panelists, and then we will open it up for Q&A. Before we get to the program, we have a couple of housekeeping items. Please feel free to change your name in Zoom to include your company name if you'd like. The Q&A chat will be open throughout the presentation, although any questions placed there will not be asked until the open Q&A part of our time. As participants, you are able to chat between yourselves. And just so you know, as a point of reference, I'd like to share a little bit about Telliant Systems. We are a 2020 Inc. 5000 list member, and we celebrated our 10th anniversary in 2020. I'd like to say something about COVID, but I won't. We are based in Alpharetta, Georgia, and we are a custom software development and testing services firm. We are excited about this subject and many others. And we are excited about the spiritual discussion that it is sure to elicit from our panelists. How and when you create a new piece of software is a very important subject in many businesses. And the possibility of creating new software for our clients is an exciting endeavor for us. Please let us know if you need any help with anything. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Seth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Telliant Systems, a serial entrepreneur in software and technology, and a digital health board member for the Technology Association of Georgia. Seth?
Hey, thank you, Tracy. And I would like to first welcome everyone, all our panelists today, plus all the participants who have been kind enough to spare their hour today for us and being able to participate and attend on this exciting conversation that we're going to have today. As Tracy mentioned, the topic for today is build versus buy. I've been in the IT field close to 32 years now, maybe even longer. But over the years, being involved in software and product development, I have noticed that this is a challenge that all IT practitioners deal with in some form or the other in their career, which is whether to buy software that has already been created by a company through some kind of a licensing or subscription model, or to develop it in-house for their use or for your company's use. So it's a very interesting question and decision that companies and people are going through pretty much regularly, and it's something that's fascinated me. So I'm very excited to have this discussion on this topic, and I would like to thank our participants. So let me do a quick introduction of the panelists that have joined us today. First, we have Walt Carter, who is a CDO and CIO with Home Bank. And he's actually based here in Atlanta, Georgia. And Walt has more than 25 years in technology leadership roles. And he specializes in aligning technology choices to business strategy and in driving results focused on innovation. Walt and his teams have implemented technology changes to drive over 200% growth in origination volume. He's in the mortgage loans business in his company over the last 2 years, which is pretty impressive. And they have received accolades from New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Kiplinger's, Bloomberg, and MarketWatch for innovative use of technology as a key differentiator. So thanks, Walter, for joining us. Next, I would like to introduce Brian Gaffigan. Brian is an executive advisor and a strategic IT consultant for Broad Thinking LLC. And he's also part of the Animalytics company, which is a veterinary software company. And thanks again, Brian, for joining. Brian's a highly accomplished technology leader in corporate business systems and information technology, successfully delivering over 25 plus organization-wide IT programs, including 6 national and global integration efforts over a 30-year career in a broad range of businesses, including manufacturing, healthcare, financial services, and education. He specializes and his organization specializes in IT leadership, IT strategies, IT management, IT architecture, program management, organizational development, process improvement, strategic planning, IT mergers and acquisitions, and animal health. So thank you, Brian, for joining us. Next, we have David Carabinos, who's a former CEO of PointClear. And so David has a number of years experience in building executive teams, building business units, and building companies. His responsibilities have included strategy, revenue generation, business operations, financial management, and raising capital and M&A. As a retired CEO and current board director for PointClear Solutions for 10 years, in addition to being an entrepreneur with decades of experience as an executive to the IT organizations and BPO outsourcing industry, both as a provider and also as a buyer and advisor. He has served on the board of numerous startups, early stage companies, and nonprofit organizations. So again, David, thank you for joining us. With that, I would like to welcome David Carabinos to share his experience with the whole buying and versus building process. I think he's got some information that he would like to share now. Thanks and welcome, David.
Thank you, Seth, for the kind introductions. I very much appreciate being invited to the panel today and look forward to the dialogue.
Sure.
There we go. So this topic in decision to buy or build software is the proverbial fork in the road dilemma. Once you make the decision to go one way or another, there really is no turning back. Well, actually you can, but it will be expensive, timely, and risky. Clearly you want to avoid this. My goal in the few minutes I have is to simply share my top of mind thoughts on what is new about this decision in today's software market. So this fork in the road has been there for decades. The question for us, why is it relevant today? And what's the big deal? The answer is the dynamics that impact your decision are changing, and in some cases accelerating. We'll touch on some examples in a bit, but if you have this decision to make in the near term, you want to understand what these dynamics are. Anyone on this webinar is familiar with this topic to some degree. For contextual purposes only, I thought I'd share the core benefits of buying or building a software solution, but not a full trade-off analysis of the pros and cons, just the core benefits. The first topic is your strategic interest. The benefits from buying is that you have a well-designed and proven solution that comes from continuous improvement from a large user and customer base, with investment funded by many companies solving the same problem. As a side benefit, you also avoid the often internal over-engineering of software by many stakeholders in your company. The benefits of buying include IP ownership that can improve the company's enterprise value, and the solution fits your workflow and you can evolve it with your business over time and more easily. The second topic is investment, and it's pretty simple. Buying is lower cost and minimum time to stand up to the solution, and ongoing costs are directly linked to utilization and volumes. Build, on the other hand, can be lower total cost of ownership if managed well, and this is important. Software is complex to manage. If you don't have this as a core competency, costs and timeline overruns are common. The third topic is time. Simple again. Buy is all about speed to implementation or speed to market. Build, can't think of many benefits from a time standpoint. It just takes longer and can be more costly if you don't develop software solutions on a consistent basis. Of course, leveraging a development partner that does do that can mitigate the risk. And that brings us to risk. Buy is no doubt lower risk, especially when it comes to development. Build? Well, there are some tangible risk management benefits to building. One, you can avoid the risk of your supplier's roadmap changing direction without your influence. Two, you avoid the risk of your supplier sunsetting the product. And finally, you avoid the risk of a supplier being acquired and you are forcing a product migration. A perfect example of this is the EMR in the healthcare industry, the EMR product industry consolidation currently underway. So what happened? 15 to 20 years ago, buying was expensive in terms of licensing, setup, maintenance, consulting, and training. Frankly, building at that time was more attractive in many ways. The buy versus build decision was commonplace and a best practice for enterprise organizations. But something happened, something called cloud-based SaaS solutions, and all thanks to the explosion of cloud-based software funded by venture capital. The result today is there is a lightweight solution for practically any business problem out there. There's only one thing I have to say about this slide. SaaS off-the-shelf solutions that deliver real value is crack to VCs. They can't get enough of it. And here's why. Look at the steady climb of SaaS company valuation multiples since 2008. The return on invested capital is incredible. SaaS simply works as a business model and solution for small to mid-market companies and large enterprise corporations. From my opening slide, I mentioned there are changing and accelerating dynamics that can impact your decision. One example is regulations that can force your hand. A clear and current example is the CMS Interoperability Act in healthcare, requiring health plans and hospitals to make the data in their systems more accessible by all the stakeholders in the system, including patients. As a result, payers and providers are scrambling to comply with the act by June of 2021. Now, this probably will get delayed, but it's not going to take the pressure off. This is forcing them to buy solutions from third parties where normally they would prefer to build. Flip that coin over. On the other hand, low-code, no-code development platforms are making it easier, cheaper, and faster to build software today. And finally, the business model and size of your company matters when making this fork in the road decision. If you are a small company, you have little capital and a small team, which means you have less ability to build. If you're a large company, however, you clearly have more ability to build. And finally, don't forget about your business model. If the software in question is your core differentiator or strategically supports your core differentiator, you should probably build it. So thank you, and I'll now toss it back for a panel discussion. Seth?
Hey, Seth, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Yeah, David, that was great. I think you hit some really good points there, especially the one about the real explosion of cloud-based SaaS software. So let me kick it off by basically essentially asking a similar question to all three of you so that we all know where you're coming from. So I'll start with Walt. In general, Walt, do you prefer buying software or having one custom made? And what is your justification for either approach?
So it depends. I will say that in the mortgage space, I mean, most of what I'm doing is buying software, and I'm doing it for, essentially one of the same reasons that David called out in the deck a minute ago, which is, I've got an intense regulatory environment, and I need, to be able to essentially have reps and warrants on software like my loan origination system, where I have other folks, lawyers and legal minds standing in front of my team in case there's a problem. And it's very similar to the healthcare industry. Again, you want to have, as much protection as you can, especially as, things are not as clear cut in the regulations as the folks that write those things might think they are. A lot of open interpretation there. And so better to have, another team. And again, there's something to be said about the market share and participation on systems like that So for instance, our loan origination system has more than 50% of the market. And that's a pretty strong position to be in when, you know, the regulators are saying, well, you're not doing things in a compliant way. Well, if I'm using their software the way they intended it, then I'm protected by them first, and then my own legal team second, right? Now, I also do a lot of work, you know, in the innovation space, and you know, and some of the things, the accolades, Seth, that you called out, you know, in my introduction, was because I turned, you know, a previous mortgage company into a software development house, and we built unique software to explain our product that, you know, we frankly couldn't buy from anybody else. So we were left with, you know, an opportunity there, and we seized it and we took it. I think, you know, I'm more and more excited about low code and no code because it gives you that opportunity to move fast and you know, figure it out quickly, whether you're going to get a market response or not. But for the bulk of what we're doing in the high risk part of our business, I really want to be protected. So my preference really is to buy. And then my other preference is, when I don't have that option, to invent and move as fast as I can to figure it out. So I'll stop there and let you guys weigh in on that.
Oh, great point. Especially in an industry that's very compliance driven, and so maybe relying on an external company that is sort of focused on it, and it kind of not necessarily shifting the blame, but you know, maybe sharing the risk, so to speak. Of that's a good point. Let me move to Brian. Brian, I think first I would like to hear your point of view to begin with. Plus, maybe along with that, I think, would you say that knowing your business or like what the company that you're representing and what business you are in, whatever business model you are in, is that a key factor in making the build versus buy decision?
Thanks, Seth. Absolutely, it's actually imperative. And even though I'm representing the build side, so to speak, I would say it depends as to what's the right answer and what even I prefer. And that really goes back to what's making your business unique. What is your differentiating factor? And where are you bringing value? I mean, Walt gave an outstanding example in his opening remarks that he found, you know, his preferences to buy or to get to buy, but he pivoted at one situation where he saw uniqueness and actually went and built the software, which is a very powerful thing to do. And you have to know your business to make that decision. You know, I call it a bit of a soul searching exercise, because a lot of us think we're differentiated in ways we really aren't. And it forces you to really say, well, what am I bringing to the table that other people aren't? And to me, that's the most critical part that you have to go through, because there's a ton of great software out there today. And even though you find a uniqueness in your business, it actually doesn't mean that uniqueness is intersected with software either. So, you know, you really just have to, ask some tough questions, because it is, to David's point, it's a big investment when you go to the build side. And, you know, I've spent the last 10 years of my life building basically exclusively, except for email and some other things that you take off the shelf, but everything else it's our IP of our business. So we reduce it to software.
Great. David, let me come back to you. In your presentation, one of the things you mentioned is the amount of burgeoning of software in cloud and SaaS space. So another way to put it is, every business problem, I mean, this is kind of like what do you call, basically labor is broken down into so many different specializations, because it's possible, because of low code and no code, for every business aspect, you can create software that addresses that specific need. So first, do you have a a sort of a bias one way or the other? Plus, do you think that having so many, is it fragmented in the sense like if I have to depend as a business owner, if I have to depend on 10 or 20 different pieces of software that I'm using from a SaaS vendor, is my data and is my intelligence of our operations spread out so thin in so many different places that I can't build a cohesive strategy. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, but one thing is the point that you're bringing up is if you're a company, then you've got 15 to 20 different SaaS solutions, point solutions, if you will. They can actually be more disruptive to workflow than beneficial to workflow. So that is an interesting issue. The other thing I would say is that we're only in the third or fourth inning of SaaS, and what I mean by that is it's evolving, and what it's provided for is the venture capital community is funding the experimentation of software solutions for American business. So it's a lot cheaper to stand up a SaaS solution and experiment with it to see if it's got viability than ever before. So that's why we're seeing the proliferation of them. And the topic of bias, if you asked Brian and Walt if they have a particular bias, I don't. But I will say that companies and industries do today in terms of buy versus build. So for example, in the healthcare industry, health payers or health plans, they have a bias toward building, and providers or the hospital systems have a bias toward buying. And why is that? Well, by the way, that's just healthcare, but financial services and manufacturing have a bias toward buying. Energy, CPG, publishing tend to build. So why are these biases inherently built into these business models? And I think it's for two reasons. One is the vendor markets, the maturity of the vendor markets selling product into those industries are more mature than others. The more mature they are, the more available product to buy from tends to skew the bias. And the other one is workflow. If these enterprises have truly unique differentiated workflow and the vendor market is not mature, then they're going to have a bias toward building. And I think that's what's driving both of those biases.
Interesting. Going back to Walt, assuming that you're going to buy, is there a threshold that you look for that it meets a certain percent of your need? Because no software off the shelf is going to exactly fit what you need. So you got two options: either you change your workflow or process flow to suit what the software does, or you customize the software, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you think you go about making that decision to see if the fit is exact or if it is close enough that you can live with that?
Yeah, actually, Seth, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this over the years, and I use a couple of tools that help me. First of all, I'm ex-military, so everything's an acronym. So forgive me, but I use this acronym called FUSE to help me keep from blowing one, and it stands for functionality, usability, supportability, and extensibility. And so as I'm evaluating the software, and if it's a package, for instance, which I've done a lot of work implementing package software, usually, it's, does it have the functionality that I need? Does it have those factors that I just called out? A key distinction is that, there is no perfect match. So I think, where a lot of software projects go off the rails, frankly, is right at the beginning in defining what the clear target is for what you're trying to do with the software. And to your point, a lot of times you can grab a package that does most of what you need, but doesn't do everything that the incumbent package does. And so that creates an opportunity. Can I modify that package that I'm buying to do those things? Or do I really need to go outside of the package and write, custom software to replace that part of my workflow, right? Or that part of my automation. One other factor that's often overlooked is, a lot of times, as you move forward in time, the packages include functionality that you previously didn't have automated, that is being done manually. And you've got to measure and do some benchmarking around what you're doing manually as well, that it could add to the power of your return on investment or return on effort there, if you include that as an offset against some of the things that you're going to have to build or modify within the package, right? Which is all work. There is no free in IT. And all of this is ultimately going to reside as a work package that somebody's got to implement and execute on. So I think if you look at, those four primary driving factors, functionality, usability, supportability, extensibility, and then look at those, is this most of what I need, all of what I need, more than what I need? That's very rare. And am I going to have to do modifications and configuration, or am I going to have to really write code external to this package to replace some of that? And I think that's the way I've always looked at it. What about you guys? What you other guys think about that?
Oh, that's great. That's great. I do have one really quick follow-up, Walt. What about changing your process to fit the software? Like, is that ever a consideration?
Well, it's normally an outcome of any kind of software upgrade, to be honest with you, or replacement. I will tell you that my experience is that the people involved are not usually fans of that. One of the other things that I've seen over and over again is, your user community will try to force the new package to look and feel like the old package that they were comfortable with. And and sometimes the hardest part of the technology project is not the technology pieces. It's actually getting the people warmed up to the idea that this new software is going to improve their lives and make us a better company somehow. So I'll stop there. I got long.
Hey, Seth, I have a comment on that. The management consulting technology consulting boom of the 90s was a direct function of SAP. I mean, SAP drove billions of dollars of consulting fees because they were saying, you take it the way we deliver it to you and you re-engineer your business process re-engineering. That's what it was all about.
No, that's a good point. So I'll come to you, Brian. To kind of you can react to both Walt and David's comments there. But on top of that, when companies buy software like that, and like Walt mentioned, customizing it to fit their needs, what are the challenges and issues you think that are faced in that process? And can you talk a little bit more on that?
Well, I'm pretty religious on this issue. I think it's a fundamental question when if you're going to buy a package and you already think you're going to modify it, I think you've made a mistake. So I think you really need to ask yourself. So David, I'm a little bit in the re-engineering sort of realm of, I put in SAP globally, and we took that very approach and challenged ourselves as to what really made us unique and what were these factors that we said, oh, we have to modify the package. And we, at the end of the day, found very few things that we truly needed to change the software for. I think if you can have minor adjustments, but my suggestion is to really look at the best practices that a package delivers, and in many cases they're quite good. We had a saying at a prior company of mine: "Is good enough," and spend your time and energy on the things that make you different. And that didn't mean we didn't do some customization, but it was very, very regimented as to what was allowed to be adapted and what not. Because when an upgrade comes and you've made extensive changes to that package, you are going to regret it for a very long time.
That is true.
Yep.
So David, I think there is a lot that can be said about whether you want to take a package and customize it, or you want to kind of try and use it as much as possible. This is something that we face a lot. Like we have a CRM that we are using, and the CRM is pretty good, but we like to see things our way. But I think sometimes if we spend enough time, the CRMs have the provision to do what you're looking for. You just need to look at it in a different way, or maybe you'll get your reports in a different way. So, we have thought about changing our process and the way we do business to kind of suit what the software does, right? So, I think maybe you can comment on that. Plus, on top of that, out of all the criteria that company might consider in making the decision, what in your mind are the top 2 or 3 factors that companies should consider when they are making the decision between build and buy?
Yeah, so from my standpoint, I kind of have 3. One is, does the decision to either buy or build align with your strategic interests? That was one of the slides. So to me, that's so important. Buying SAP or buying a mortgage package or a financial services, software package, which are mature, extremely mature, products out there. Why would you even bother building with that? So to me, that doesn't make sense. And if your workflow is so unique that you have to change it to accommodate using SAP, maybe you should consider changing your workflow. That's something to consider, but that wasn't your question. So number 1 is, does the decision to either buy or build align with your strategic interests? Number 2 is, if so, can I afford the total cost of ownership over time? And that's really kind of hard to understand, but it's important for you to understand that as best you can. And then number 3 is, does the ultimate decision to provide the maximum flexibility, does the decision, buy or build, provide the maximum flexibility to adapt to changing business conditions? You never want to get stuck or stranded. So that's one thing that those 3 are the most important things for me to consider in buying, the decision to buy or build.
Yeah, that's very, very valid points there. Walt, from your perspective, what do you look for? Although your bias is more toward buying when possible, what are the situations maybe when you would consider building? Like, what are the factors that you think might maybe, convince you to do a build option?
Well, I would just say this, when I look back over the last few years, especially as a CIO coming into organizations, what I found most frequently is that the package software that's in place has been heavily customized, right? And I spend a lot of my first year in those jobs trying to get back to as close to a vanilla on the package as I can, right? Which requires me to work with the operations teams and the user community basically to redefine their workflow. And so, the business analyst and the folks that work in that space turn out to be incredibly valuable in what's really a recovery, right? Or a restoration mode, right? That's really hard to do. I've also, walked into organizations where, they were rolling out package software and customizing it like crazy, even though the package would do those things that they wanted. They just couldn't understand their workflow presented differently, right? Because, as David called out, in a lot of the heavily regulated industries, there's not that much difference really in how you present and how you actually deliver on your product or service, mix. It's really pretty much the same. I mean, I'll use my own, industry as an example. I mean, everybody in the mortgage industry sells pretty much the same products at pretty much the same prices and pretty much the same way in order to deliver a compliant loan to the investors that actually help us cash flow the business. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in, what you're doing and how you do it. And so what are those unique differentiators? And is that then going to be reflected in, either customization or modification to the package software that you use? It's interesting. I think right now what we're seeing in the mortgage industry too is there's several companies that have come out of the gate and said, look, we think there's a whole better way to approach this. We can use Salesforce, for instance, as a platform, and we can deliver a full mortgage experience from your CRM. You don't need one of those big, heavy-duty loan origination systems. And that is working for some of those guys, right? It's much more difficult, though, I think, Seth, to pull people away from something that they've grown comfortable with, right? So for our user community, they're very comfortable with the package that we have. They've been using it for more than 12 years. And consequently, getting them to move away from it, it turns out to be a much more difficult proposition than you might think. And, and it all comes back to, kind of that SAP story that David's talking about in a way. I mean, Accenture used to do the same thing. Anderson, is method one size fits all. Everybody use it the way we tell you. Insert client name here on the slide deck, right? And, and I made a lot of money as a consultant a few years ago following those guys around and said, yeah, it didn't really work, did it? And because one size doesn't fit all, right? And you are unique and you are special. And so, there's pros and cons with any of these various approaches. And, and I hate using the word bias. In my industry, yes, we have a bias, just like as David pointed out, and it's to protect ourselves from the regulators by using package software. But for a lot of our point of sale things and a lot of our marketing things, it actually makes more sense to build and go out and create your own path because nobody's doing it the way you're doing it, right? And that's where I think the low code and the no code stuff becomes incredibly valuable because I can go in at a really low cost and build what is essentially industrialized software for an enterprise using that tool set. So like I said, I think there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, just which cat are we trying to skin?
Right. No, this is great. Yeah, you're right. I think this is a really, it's a complex problem. I agree that, everything that you have highlighted there. I mean, we all know the horror stories that we have read. I don't remember who it was, but, we have heard countless stories of people taking on things like SAP or Epic and trying to spend years customizing it, and at the end of it, just canning the whole thing, right? So, and also we have heard of horror stories when it comes to trying to build something from scratch, and it's a big challenge, and it can be done, but like you said, the requirements right in the beginning, trying to understand what problem are we trying to solve and trying to make sure that everybody buys into it and we keep the scope narrow and we deliver on it, and then understand that it's going to take many iterations before you really get it to where you want it to be. So with that, Brian, I will kind of ask you that question is, when building software, what are the misconceptions that you've seen, and what are the challenges in building itself that that you have to be aware of, and maybe based on your experience, what you have seen go wrong? I'm sure there's a lot of that.
Well, I think the biggest misconception when people enter into a build or a modify is, again, not to be a broken record, they think they're different in that space when they're not. And to Walt's point, it's hard to change people's behavior. It's hard to get them to realize that they aren't different in that space. I not only am I an IT guy, I'm also a finance guy. And when we did put in SAP, we had to accept, if we were to lead from the top, that our chart of accounts was not unique to our business. But we had 55 entities that all believed, all their accountants thought, well, actually, I can't run this business if I can't use my chart. which is silly. And of course you can. And you had to work with those folks to actually get to that point. So I think it's again that it's that soul searching. Am I really different in this part? Or are we all selling the same mortgage package and we just are trying to? I think it's an outstanding example of trying to use an existing software tool to actually deliver your common model in a different way. I think that's outstanding for your customers and good innovation. And once that's there, you're gonna be differentiated on a different level, and it may not even be software. And I think the other misconception, a big one, is that, in my view, control and flexibility is always a good thing. Control and flexibility comes with responsibility. So when you enter into a build, I actually think of it like having a kid. It's there for a while. You have a long-term responsibility when you do that. And so it may feel better up front, but if you don't put the time and energy and investment into it, it's definitely gonna bite you in the end.
Yeah, that's a good point. So before I go on to David, I would like to invite the audience to anybody that might have any questions for the team to please go ahead and use the chat window to put in those questions. I'll go to David now. David, you said you don't necessarily have a bias one way or the other, but do you feel like companies, I think you may have touched on it, some industries have a more of a bias towards buying versus building. Do you think it makes sense for a company to have a preferred strategy one way or the other based on whether they are a compliance heavy business or whether how competitive and how differentiated they need to be in their markets to be successful? So can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of covered the topic pretty well of industries that are highly regulated with a mature vendor market. There's no reason to build another mortgage system or another CRM or another financial accounting system. Those are transaction based and they're mature. If you don't mind, Seth, I'd like to tag along with Brian on the topic of the risk of building. And
Sure.
The risk can be mitigated, but I like to tell, I have a favorite singer, and it's a reminder to myself. The first time you do anything in life is the most inefficient time you will ever do it. The second time you're going to get much better, and then third time and so forth. And what happens is when someone comes up with an idea that they need to build software, they really have convinced themselves they need to do it for all good reasons. If they don't have the ability to do it internally, if they don't have a team that is currently building product, it's going to be a mess. It's going to be expensive. It's going to have false starts to it. You're going to have to go out and hire people and bring them into the company that know how to do it. So just because there is a business reason to build software for whatever reasons, I'll give you one example. It doesn't mean it's the right decision to do. Or if you do it, you better know what you're getting into. So for example, at PointClear, similar to your company, we're for hire company to help companies build software for them, right? And so the reason that they hired us is because there were gaps in the market, the vendor market, for what they wanted to do. And one example is a company in Atlanta called Navicure, and it was revenue cycle and healthcare. I think it's now called, they got merged with Waystar, but they had a huge development team, but their development team was working on their core products day in and day out, getting the next revision out the door. They weren't about in R&D. They weren't about taking an idea and doing everything that you needed to do to figure out how to competitively differentiate that new product, how to design it, and how to build it, and get it out to market. So companies like that would hire us to help them take their new idea, but they didn't have the internal resources to just do it, the capacity or the capability. But then once we would build the solution for them, then we would help them train, hire, and transition over, so they'd get the solution out quicker. They would mitigate the risk, but they would end up managing the solution long term. So I just want to leave the point that I've been in the software industry since 1976, and roadkill on projects is like, it's just there. So what you want to do is you want to mitigate the risk associated with that.
Yeah, no, well said. I think we all will agree that software is really a messy business, that don't get into it if you can avoid it. But of course, there's a lot of money that can be made in software as well. So gentlemen, I think we are at a point now where as a panel, first of all, I want to thank the panel for being so engaging. I think we might have some questions from the audience, and I'm also going to open it up to Chris and Tracy to see if they have any questions. So Tracy, do you want to take it up from here?